Good bereavement policy. I mean, first and foremost, that it exists, because it doesn't always in organizations. And I think organizations are still kind of realizing that they should have a separate bereavement policy or a specific policy that looks at bereavement. We often find it kind of lumped in with other policies or just kind of a small kind of footnote on a compassionate leave policy. And if you think about any of us, I'm sure most of us on this call have experienced a bereavement, and that's why we're here today. To have your bereavement reduced to a footnote or a kind of asterisk on a policy is incredibly kind of demoralizing and patronizing, I think, to see that. So even just having a dedicated policy is a massive start. When you do create that policy, having it being led by employees, so not just having a kind of stock standard generic. I know templates can be very helpful as a starting point, but I would definitely encourage people to personalize that to their organization. Lead from employees. Don't just have a number of days because you've read it on the internet or someone's told you to do that amount of days. Actually talk to your employees and have it led by them in terms of what they need from you. We've already touched a little bit on flexibility and compassion. I think that's huge. So some of the things we encourage people to have in their policies are things like pre-bereavement leave. We work in the hospice world. We know that sometimes we are given warning if someone is dying or in their last stages of their life. So let people take that pre-bereavement leave to spend with their loved one before they have died, when they still have time to be with them and say the things that they need to say to them, or just connect as a family with the person who is dying. But then also we want to see that compassion and that flexibility kick in afterwards and long term as well. So Lucy's just shared that incredible example of someone wanting to not take their full time in the summer holidays because they're sitting on a beach and kind of contemplating the scale of the loss that they've just experienced. And I think that's the same for a lot of people. They may want to come back to work quite quickly and have that respite from their grief or that distraction from their grief. But then later down the line, when things kind of kick in, or maybe there's time they want to spend with their children or their family, or it's the person's birthday, or there's religious holidays, can that kick in, 6-12 months down the line? I think we put this quite restrictive timeline on it, which is you take the time off for the funeral when the person first dies, and then, if you're lucky, you take 2 weeks. Most people only get about 3 to 5 days, and then you're expected to be back at work as normal. And it's, what does that even look like or mean to be back at work as normal? We see a lot of unnecessary restrictions, I think, around when it can be taken, but also who it can be taken for. So I think that's still a really, I want to say, quite archaic way to look at bereavement. So it's kind of, they have to be an immediate family member, they have to be a blood relative. It's 2023, people don't have traditional family structures, people have chosen families. So I think we're trying to do away with that a little bit, recognize that people live in multi-generational households, people live in households with people they're not related to. So why are we still telling people it has to be your parent or your partner or your child? So we're trying to do away with that as well. And then I guess some other things that I've just noticed, I read a lot of bereavement policies, and it's really interesting sometimes the tone of policies and how clinical they can seem. Something we ask people to do, I've said it on lots of different webinars and when I've gone through policies with people, is just read your policy out loud from start to finish. If you don't want to read it out loud because it's incredibly long, that probably tells you something about it being too long and other people not wanting to read it as well. So read it out loud from start to finish. Imagine a line manager reading it because their team member has just been bereaved, or imagine a bereaved person reading it as well. And imagine what it feels like if someone that you love has just died, and then you read this policy that's incredibly restrictive, confusing, quite harsh in the language. I've seen examples, I'm not even exaggerating, I've read a policy not so long ago where they had written, if one of your children dies, you get this amount of leave. If 2 of your children dies, you get this amount of leave. If more than 2 of your children die, please get in touch with us and we'll discuss what happens. And you just look at a policy like that and think, who wrote that, and what mindset, and also what do they expect someone to think when they're reading that as a bereaved parent or as anyone who's bereaved. It was just, horrific. So read your policy, think about the tone of it. When in doubt, write it as if you would say it to a person, because that's how they're going to interpret it when they read it to themselves. They'll hear it in their own voice, and it's an incredibly harsh voice to hear when you're bereaved. And don't be afraid to sound human. And then I guess kind of some aftercare of it as well. Your bereavement policy should be a living, breathing document. So it should be based on employees. You should be getting feedback from them. The signposting should be regularly updated. Make sure it's geographically diverse. I think in the UK we're very England, London centric. So make sure you have bereavement support in Scotland and Wales and Ireland and, you know, all over the UK as well. Yeah, I think that's all about. I've kind of waffled on for a bit, but there's a lot about policies. I could do a whole thing just on policies, but yeah, policies are incredibly interesting.